All right, as we focus on the history of England, there's three vocabulary words in particular from these slides that we really want to make sure that we understand. Common law was a system of laws based on precedents and customs. So, what this means is in England, they had a common law system, which we built into the foundation of our Constitution for America. As colonists, we were, following traditions and norms from England. So one of the things they did to really kind of, understand here the definition of common law, it involves the word precedence. So we need to know what a precedent means. And this is something that we will also be revisiting with the judicial branch in chapter, I believe, 8. So a precedent is a ruling in an earlier case that was similar. So this means if you had, a case from, let's just say, modern times, 1995, we would look at a case, that happened before 1995 that was similar and relatable, and then the ruling in the modern day case would be based on what we've, ruled in the past. Of course, at any time courts can, rule in a different direction, and that's more that we'll get into for the judicial branch. And then lastly, we have a colony, which is a group of people that are living in one place while being ruled by a parent country somewhere else. So if we look here, I hope that by now we should have at least known that there were 13 colonies in the beginning of the United States, and they were being ruled by Great Britain and England, again, same country back in Europe. Now, one of the words that we also want to know, that we'll be working with more in future activities for this chapter, is mercantilism. This was this idea or theory that a country needs to sell more goods than to other countries than it buys. So if they're selling more goods versus how many they're buying, that's going to be good for their country. It's pretty much common sense, kind of, right? I mean, it's just business. You want to sell more things than you buy. The thing was, though, that Great Britain was kind of taking advantage of the American colonists. How so? Well, Great Britain was in need of these materials to even, make goods or even to just sell and provide to other countries. So the colonies were asked to provide the cheap raw materials like cotton and lumber for really low prices to the British. And then to make it even worse, kind of for the, colonists' sake, the colonists had to buy British products at high prices. So again, we'll focus more in a couple days from now, but products like glass or tea and lead, these were things that the colonists needed in North America that they didn't have available to them. And the British were charging them even more, like overpricing the products. So if you can kind of get an early sense here, tension is starting to grow, very quickly once the colonists do come to North America. So we will talk about colonies real quickly around the world. This is not something that was only exclusive to North America. This is actually a map here from 1900. So this is 100 plus years after, America's declared our independence and formed our own country. You have now a map of all of the other parts of the world that were still in 1900 belonging to the British, aka England now, right? So you look at the map, you can see Australia and India over here on the right. And then, you have parts of South Africa, North Africa, and even in Central, the Caribbean, a bunch of islands and this is like Northern North America. So the northern part of Canada. And, England wasn't the only country that did this. Okay. One of the reasons we talk about, being aware of who influences us in our lives and, who you're making friends with and, where you're spending your time, how you're spending your time, what kind of choices you're making. in the end, we all understand that we're influenced by others, whether it be family or friends, or just, people in the world that we see today on our phones and stuff. So colonies were a thing that was like trending, right? It was something that was common back then. And right, wrong, or indifferent, all we can do now as people living in the modern day world is look back and say, well, why did they do this? And, highlight what was good about it, what worked, and also, discuss what kind of wasn't fair about it. So, you know, focusing on the positives here, though, you see on this map, you have a place like Portugal, which is in Europe over here. Okay. They colonized Brazil. And, today people from Brazil, they have a lot of strong roots that are still Portuguese culture at heart. I mean, many people in Brazil speak Portuguese. So, you know, colonies and just the way of the past, again, putting all the things that maybe were wrong about how people were treated, it is what it is, in the sense that at least we can understand our roots. Okay, focusing on the positives and our roots, it makes more sense now when you think about it, maybe in that sense, that the entire west coast of North America and Central America and down into South America was all colonized by Spain. So when they came over from Europe, first they landed in the Caribbean and then they came over here. It was only then after that, the British came over to North America, and then we formed the colonies. And now, as you can see here, America's in pink because by the year 1800, America has declared independence and, formed their entire separate countries. So that's a little bit later in this chapter. So what we're going to do now is just focus on 4 events from England's history. And in particularly, again, we want to focus on what came from that time period, or, what did we learn, or how is America influenced from, the event that we're looking at. So the biggest thing we must remember is that when the founding settlers came to North America, some people, yes, they were involved in leadership and setting up the government and, making decisions for how things would work and move forward. And they were working with the British and the leaders from England. And, the first couple presidents of the United States weren't born here, they were born in England. So that's the leaders. But the majority of people that came, right, the actual colonists, the small average person, that really just doesn't get talked about a lot in history, their intentions were pure. They came here for a variety of things, which we'll continue to look at in this chapter, but they were promised to be treated as if they were born and raised in England, all liberties and freedom, just like if they were in England. So they were just looking for a new beginning. And I'm sure many of us can, I hope you can relate. At some point in our lives, we all want some fresh new start and opportunities. And that's really, the backbone of what our country was built on, regardless of what we know about maybe select individuals that were involved and, throughout history, and, what kind of choices they made. The core of people that built this country were average citizens that just, wanted a new life and a new opportunity. So the first settlement, I'm sure you've heard of Jamestown before. It was in Virginia. If you haven't, it's, not the end of the world. It's just a, commonly referred to one of the more popular first settlements. There's a lot of speculation now, like, well, maybe they weren't the first. There was these people over here and stuff. But again, we're just trying to focus on some key understandings of how our roots in America were influenced by England. So when they came over, they started a charter, which is a written document. They started with, a charter that's a written document granting them the land. So the people that were in charge in England actually gave, the earliest settlers a piece of paper that basically said, here, you have this land, and you are allowed to go set up, a colonial government for us. And they chose 2 representatives from each county, And this is now the first time in America around the year 1600 you have colonists choosing their own leadership, right? So after everything we talked about in previous activities, now they're choosing their own leaders in North America, and these are newly created roles. So a lot of newer people were kind of getting involved in representation and government. And, again, they were having a voice for themselves here in North America. So in 1620, the Pilgrims come over to Massachusetts, and I think Christopher Columbus, and the Pilgrims. This has been talked about a lot throughout history, and the biggest thing here is very simply that they had an agreement. There was a contract among the group of people in what their mission was, and if you actually look things up and research, what their terms and conditions were, it was interesting, but this is where you see an agreement. It's just a formal contract among people. It's written in stone, so to speak. It was, obviously on paper, but um, this was something that kept people's word while out there in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, sailing across the Atlantic Ocean, and still today, we even when we download apps, it's not called a compact, but you do have to select I agree. So it's the same thing in the sense that there were terms and conditions, and people either agreed or disagreed, and then obviously if they agreed, they got on the ship and the journey began. And now we're going to finish here lastly with the two activities, I'm sorry, the two events in history on the same slide. It's really a kind of, again, just chronological order of events. So after Jamestown and after the Pilgrims, now we're getting ahead here to the year 1707, kind of just, jumping forward to when Great Britain becomes England, because it, unified and kind of formed an alliance with some other countries in Europe. So then, within the next 30 years or so, by 1733, you have 13 colonies fully established in North America. They had, their own legislators, meaning lawmakers. And, the colonies were, beginning to start to thrive. The people were contributing to their towns, helping out, building roads and schools and churches, hospitals. Okay. And, that's something else that we'll talk about more as a class discussion. But, when America was founded, at least the way we know it, in terms of America, we're not going to get into right now, not here through the recording, but obviously, there was a transition from what was in North America when the Native Americans lived here to what the colonists built to make it resemble England. And that took a lot of hard work, a lot of effort from the people in the community to contribute to build something nice to cherish. And, I think in today's world, we need to see more people in America kind of taking ownership maybe and contributing, because that's really what made this country feel so special, because it was kind of built from the bottom up by people who wanted their independence.